Who Actually Knows podcast. This is for all things 20s, hosted by a 20-something herself. There's no rule book, you can't write it, but this is going to be an audible journey for me and for you. The 20s can be fun, crazy, lonely, exciting, all of the above. So tune in weekly because we're going to talk about it all here. Real, raw, vulnerable, and funny on a good day on the Who Actually Knows podcast.
Okay. All right, you guys, welcome to a really fun and crossover episode between My Public Journal and Who Actually Knows. My name is McKailyn. I am the host of My Public Journal, and I am here with Emma, the host of Who Actually Knows.
Hi, guys. We are both so excited. We've been texting all morning, all day. I guess it's like 4 p.m. I'm in LA right now, so it's 4 p.m. We've been texting all day, and literally, I think every other message was, I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Yes, I was like kind of nervous. I was going on a walk today and I was like, why? I'm in Arizona and it's like 120 out right now. And I'm like, I'm sweating from like nerves, the heat, all of the things. But how all of this kind of came to be, I am, dare I say, a doom scroller. I feel like we all have our moments of just like scrolling on TikTok, Instagram, and I was doom scrolling one day, but this is like the one time that it worked out in my favor because I came across Emma's TikTok and it was like a snippet from her podcast. And I was like, okay, like I love this. I feel like how I think my podcast very aligned. And I don't know, it was probably like 2 or 3 days later. I might have followed you. I can't even remember, but like 2 or 3 days later, another video of hers popped up on my page. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like comment on her TikTok and we're gonna like see where this goes. And I don't even remember what I commented. I think I was just like, we have to do like a crossover episode. Like I have something very similar.
Yeah, that's like literally, I remember it was like, oh my gosh, like you have to come on my podcast. And I've reached out to other people to like come on my podcast. So like the fact that it was roles reversed and someone was reaching out to me, I was like so excited. And then yeah, you commented, we DM'd, had like a call. And I mean, honestly, I feel like the rest was like history after that. We were like, yeah, this is gonna work out. We talk about the same stuff. We've been binging each other's podcasts. So I'm excited.
Yes, it's been so good. So, for those of you who aren't super familiar with me, I'll just give like a brief overview of like who the heck McKailyn is. So I started my podcast, My Public Journal, um, a little less than a year ago. I wasn't super consistent with it. I was super nervous to launch it, but I went through like a million and one name changes before I even started. It's nerve-wracking, like putting yourself out there. And of course, my topics are very similar to Emma's, which is just like being transparent about like life in your 20s, navigating a lot of change, navigating a lot of like super heavy emotions that other people are going through, but it's hard to be the voice of it sometimes. Although some people make it look easy, it is hard kind of like having that inner dialogue be so public. So I started that a little bit ago, have been on and off with it, super, busy with work in some capacity. I am in fitness full time. But I was like, you know what? This is like my passion. I love to share with people. I love to build a community. And so I have just been leaning heavy into my two passions, which are physical health and mental health. I'm 25, so like literally smack dab in the mid of my 20s right now, which is like the theme of all of our discussions really today. And then today on my walk, I was listening to Emma's podcast and I was like, wait a minute, we're both from small towns. And I wanted to like briefly touch on this. I texted her about it and then I was like, okay, I don't want to like text too much back and forth because I wanted it to be on the podcast. But I originally am from Wyoming. I grew up most of my life between Colorado and Wyoming with divorced parents, but I grew up in Cheyenne. So it's not like a tiny, tiny town, but compared to like where I have lived and where I live now, so different, so different. And then Emma, you grew up, how small was your town? It was like 400 something people
Yeah,
or
like
like,
425.
which is insane. And your graduating class was 29, you said?
29 and completely public. So it wasn't like I went to like Catholic or private school. Like it was a public high school, 29 kids, very small. Like you knew everyone's brother, sister, aunts, uncles, grandmas. Um, yeah, crazy. Now I'm
Which
in
is
LA.
Oh my gosh, which I feel like is such like a stark difference. Like my town was not that small, and then my graduating class, I went to public school for middle school, part of high school. By the time I graduated, my graduating class was like 100 something, and I thought that was small. And I listened to your podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh. But I just love like I feel like people from small towns either like typically like definitely making this like a generalized assumption and observation, but like so many people go two different ways, which is either you like stick to your small town vibes, like you're there and you just continue to like grow and stay in like your bubble, or you totally are like, I'm gonna leave. And like my dream forever was like, I'm gonna be in New York City. And like I don't think that's my dream now, but like I always wanted like bigger and just like big communities, lots of people, nobody knowing who I am. And so I don't know, I just felt like that was like a fun little overlap. But Emma, I would love for you to kind of like introduce you. Who is Emma? How did you start podcasting? And yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Emma. I'm the host of the Who Actually Knows podcast, where we talk about all things 20s, how it's fun, confusing, etc. And I started podcasting about a year and a half ago. So February of 2023, which is also when I moved to LA. So McKailyn did a perfect job of touching on my small town roots. I am from the smallest town, 3 hours west of Chicago. I went to a big 10 University, University of Illinois, and then I moved to Chicago post-grad. And that was when I started getting into the podcasting space. And I was just listening to bigger podcasts, Call Her Daddy, The Skinny Confidential, a bunch of Dear Media podcasts that would talk a lot about being in your 20s and like things that they learned, but now they're like 35. And I was like, I love all of this. Like, I feel like I'm navigating a lot of change and like trying to figure out who I am and like going through all of that. And I was like, I love that I'm hearing the advice, but I want to hear it from someone who's like going through it. And I also wanted it to be a little bit more relatable because there's so many podcasts that are like so funny and so hilarious. And trust me, they're like the podcasts that I listen to on my free time as well. But I knew that there was like a group of people out there who just want to listen to the relatable parts. And I don't have like a huge following or anything. And I was just like, you know what? I need a hobby outside of like everything else that I'm doing, and I need to start. And I moved to LA and was like, you know what? I switched cities. I did the change. Like, why not put myself out there and start the podcast? And it's been a hobby that I've done almost weekly. Like, I did take a month break this year, and then like sometimes it was like every other week, just like depending on. But I was talking about it for so long, and just like you, like going through different like podcast names, and like I honestly like I want to rebrand again in like the middle of the podcasting thing, which like I'm sure we'll touch on at some point in our conversation. But when I first started, I bought all of my equipment off of Facebook Marketplace and I had no idea how to use it. I was like on YouTube. I was just like asking anyone like who was like tech savvy, like what to do, how to use it. And I had it. And I remember I was in the car with my boyfriend at the time and we were talking about it. And he's like, it's time that you stop talking about it and you actually do it. And remember just like putting my tail between my legs and I was like, okay, no, 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 like that's exactly what I needed. Like that's exactly the push that I needed. Created everything, did a name, recorded like an intro, and yeah, have been like doing it since and have been absolutely loving it. And it's brought me like so much joy of like an outlet of talking about things that are on my mind, but also connecting with a lot of different people via social media, just like in conversations, like out in the wild. And yeah, I've been loving it. So I do my podcast episodes weekly on Wednesdays, and you can pretty much listen to it wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, like etc. And yeah, I hope that you guys all like love this episode because I think we have a lot of overlap and we're also just talking about like super cool stuff.
Absolutely. I feel like this will be like the podcast that just like I don't know about your podcast, but for my podcast, I landed on the name My Public Journal because I was like, okay, I feel like this is like truly my journal and like whether it's therapeutic to somebody else, like I hope it is, but if it's not, like it is for me. And I talk about literally anything under the sun. And I feel like this is that episode that like takes all of these like big thoughts that I haven't really been able to digest, maybe like on a solo episode, and brings it to one and like having two very different perspectives, but like also similar personalities and mindsets, I feel like is really going to be exciting to kind of jump into all of this.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. Yeah, this has like been such an outlet and it's so fun. And I I get like random DMs, so random, from people who will be like, "Thank you so much for having a podcast." It's just like talks about like the real things without sugarcoating it. And it comes at like the perfect timing where like maybe that week I'm like, "Oh my God, like I'm not going to be authentic in like this episode. I'm not going to put it out." And then I'll like see that DM and I'm like, "But this is exactly why I'm doing it." Like to talk about the 20s and everything. And I'm glad that like we like related over like why we started it in our names and everything. I literally will be in a conversation and someone will be like talking about something, they're like, "Well, who actually knows?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
You're
yeah, who
like,
actually knows?" I'm like, "Did you know that was
love
podcast?"
it.
Like just
I
pimping
love
myself out. It's so funny. Yeah, but I'm like super excited. So today, McKailyn and I are going to talk about a lot. And it is like the phases of your 20s. We tried to deep dive into like what we wanted to pinpoint on like this collaborative podcast episode. And it was better that we just like touched about a lot of different things. We're both 25. So we've been right out of like post grad, like your first year of college. Then it's like when reality hits a little bit, finding your balance and then like finding out who you are. And I mean, we're 25, so we still have so many more phases to go through, but like these are some that just like have come and feelings that have come up. So we're actually going to do like a little bit of like an interview about the different phases. So yeah, super excited because I think a lot of you guys will relate to when you're out of college, that immediate hit of, okay, it's post grad. And then you're like, okay, well, now it's not exactly directly after post grad. It's like a year or two. And you're like, okay, I had like so much fun, so much financial freedom. What do I lean into? Who am I? What is my balance? What is going on? Like, do I like what I'm doing? Like, getting caught up maybe and like being in your 20s and just like giving into things you liked or like maybe not have. So we're gonna deep dive all into it. And I'm gonna start off with a question for McKailyn. And this is like the fresh out of college phase. So like first year. And I want to ask like what and how, not what and how, but like what was your post grad experience like, if you could summarize it?
Okay, that is a great question because I feel like my post grad and probably yours as well was unique because it was kind of in like the midst of COVID. So I definitely feel like we had a more unique post grad experience with just like maybe like I feel like I got time to like marinate on who I was a little bit more than I kind of would have in the past. I feel like a lot of people kind of are just forced, not like forced, but like there is a very kind of like clear path of like you graduate, you get your first job, you're climbing this corporate ladder. And I definitely feel like more than any other time in ever. Everything was kind of shooken up by specifically TikTok, to be honest, in 2020, of things just feeling so accessible, like influencing and putting yourself out there was in some ways a little less scary because there was this whole new platform. People were connecting like never before. People had the time to connect like never before. So I want to like preface my post grad experience with that because I recognize that there are like differences from pre-COVID and also like post-COVID. But I totally derailed my whole entire life, if I'm being honest. Like I just had so much time to reflect and really kind of refocus on who I was, what I wanted my life to be like, what my values were. And it kind of forced me into this space of just like, okay, I need to, in some sense of the word, like grow up a little bit. Like that was kind of like, as we called it, like phase one, fresh out of college. Holy crap, like going out every weekend and partying and all this stuff. Like, is this what I want to continue to do? Is this who I am? And again, COVID, life as we knew it was so different. Like the things that we used to connect people in the past were totally like wiped away. And so when I first graduated, I kind of went through this phase of number one, I was looking for just something like I had started an internship that kind of felt like my post grad experience, even though I was like technically still doing those credits for school. But I was like, okay, I have a semester left. It's going to be a internship. What do I want to do with the next couple months of my life? And I was living in Colorado at the time. I was graduating from Colorado State, which is in Fort Collins. And I had really like a really awesome opportunity to grow in the fashion industry right there in Denver, Colorado. because like Smart Wool, North Face, Vans, like all of these companies had like relocated to Denver. But for me, I was like, I need to get the heck out of college. So, or out of like college and like out of my home state. Like I just needed a change. I had never had change. I again grew up most of my life in Colorado. So my post-grad experience was like Operation Get Myself Out of Colorado. So I was applying for a ton of internships. One of them was like with Set Active in LA, GG Pip in Utah, and those were like my final two. And I was like, okay, LA for me, like kudos to you, Emma, because I'm like, I don't know how you did it. For me, LA was like still like, okay, is that like going to be too big city? You know, like I wanted to get my feet wet, but I was like, I don't want to like dive into the ocean. So I ended up going and working in Utah and I loved it. And then from there, I just kind of slid right into my internship turned into my full-time job, which I was very fortunate that it worked out that way. So I moved and then I just spent a good amount of time in Utah. But at the time, I was again just kind of like connection was different with friends, with people. I was having not even like huge falling outs, but it was harder to stay connected with people. I was kind of reevaluating my values. I was getting into fitness more. So post grad had like lots of twists and turns, but just like brief overview. Biggest thing was just again getting out of Colorado, which I did.
Yeah, and you touched on it very much at the end of like the next question I want to talk about of how did you what did relationships look like in your life? Because that is a big change of going from college and like this is what I experienced of like proximity. And then I was fortunate, lived in Chicago for a year and was close to like 10 of my girlfriends. And then left. And I have kept up with communication, like long distance friendships is something that I have prided myself on and like I'm still so close with everyone. But there are relationships from college that like aren't as close for me and I want you kind of to touch on like what those relationships looked like for you, if they, fell off, how do you maintain your friendships? What do relationships like fall on your like list of priorities right now?
That's a great question. I feel like at the time, again, like I continue to just like lean into like I was like deconstructing my life. I was like having like what felt like a quarter life crisis, but I was like not a quarter way through my life quite yet. Where I was like, what's going on, right? Like everything shut down. I at the time before graduation and everything, like I liked to go out. Like I love to go out. That's like how a lot of my friendships were kind of like rooted and based in is just like a lot of fun. And at the time, once COVID hit, I had kind of realized like the way that I was operating in my life was like not serving me personally. There was nothing wrong with going out and partying and drinking and like doing these things like for a lot of people like that's kind of what college is for and like I'm not going to dismiss the fact that there are opportunities to like get to know people when you go out, right? And so I was doing a lot of that, but I also have just struggled with like anxiety in my life. And so marrying the two what like with anxiety and drinking and doing all that, like I hit a breaking point. And I think COVID was like the perfect opportunity for me to be like, okay, the world is shutting down. This is where I can kind of like reconstruct a lot of habits. And by doing so, there were a lot of relationships that were affected by me making different decisions with what I needed for myself personally. Like, again, I was going through it. So there might have been, judgment that was passed by me that wasn't necessarily like intentional reflecting back on it. But I had a moment where I basically just like stopped like I don't want to say I had no friends, but I just kind of like leaned into my mom specifically really heavily and then like my boyfriend at the time. And I feel like in that moment a lot of people were like, "Oh my gosh, like McKailyn got this boyfriend and now she's like not friends with anybody." And it was like I was going through a lot more behind the scenes and I was like fortunate enough to have like a support system where I felt like I could kind of you know, separate myself and get to know myself with, having the support of two people that I was, consistently around. But I would say when I first left college, a lot of my friendships we're still there. Like I didn't lose all my friendships, but they just looked very different. And how we kind of operated with each other was super different. Checking in on each other, conversations of what we had, and really finding like new ways of like connection points. Like even my little in Chi, because I was like in a sorority, we had so much more that we bonded over after all of this, because we had to talk about more than just like, what are you wearing tonight to go out? Like, where are you going tonight? And so for some of my friendships, it really strengthened them. It really like gave me insight on like the people that like I don't want to say like loved me no matter what, but it really showed me like, okay, I can truly show up however I need to in front of
Mhm.
these people. And then for some people, it was just space that was given for a temporary amount of time that like now we're like great friends, 4 years removed. We are like in communication, in contact, picking up like we never left off. They did a lot of growing, I did a lot of growing. So I think like during that time, just relationships were really about either growing in that exact moment together or growing separately and maybe our paths crossing now in the future. And then there's some people that there were great friendships that just, we don't have a lot in common, not for the better or the worse in any sort of way, but we're just so different. And, I really valued all the memories and everything that we had during that period of college. But it just looks very different now. So
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that's like so important of if you're like going through something and you like have a phenomenal support system of like really leaning in, it's like why would you not choose that at the expense of like other people? And like especially it sounds like you went through like something very personal to you at such a young age, and it's like we're so young, things are going to continue to go on in our lives. It's like when that happens, like really lean into like what you need to and who you need to like get those skills of how you're going to get through it and like how you overcame it. And the best part is like the phase is like you can reprioritize, so like now I'm sure you understand yourself at a level so much more than like you did before. And now like if you want to like build those friendships back up or like go and like make friendships that are more aligned with your values and who you are to your core, you're set up way more and like way better about that. And I feel like that's such a thing that happens in your 20s of like, if you're gonna, when you said like derail, like it starts with just like questioning. Like I think everyone has almost like a I guess you could say like, a derail moment or like, oh, reconvening, realigning moment in their 20s. And like, it's totally okay. And it's totally normal. Like, don't feel lonely like at all. And that's something that I always like hone in on is like, everyone has something behind the scenes. It's just probably not always brought up to the surface.
100%. And I felt like in those moments too, like you can't like even now 4 years again removed, like I'm not necessarily like let me divulge every like nook and cranny of what was going on in my brain. But it's hard in that moment to be like this is what I'm feeling and like this doesn't serve me and this is like a big part of what our relationship is built on and like I'm choosing not to do certain things anymore. um and so yeah, it's definitely unique, but I give so much grace to people, as a friend now, as they're navigating different things, because sometimes people just need like space to be like, who am I? Because if you don't know who you are, it's really hard to build authentic relationships like on your end when you feel like you're consistently almost like mirroring other people, like what other people expect or want from you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it definitely like I don't know. I just encourage everybody, and I am proud of myself for in that moment getting to know myself. So when I could show up in friendships, like I could show up authentic to McKailyn, and it didn't like one, our values and everything meshed better together. But two, I wasn't feeling like, who am I? What do I like to do? Like, am I just doing this because this person likes it? Like, I just feel like being your friend first is so important.
Yeah. And with like the stages of you, like sounds like right out of college, you really just decided to like learn more about you. What ways do you practice staying authentic to yourself today?
It's a good question. I feel like just like always reevaluating and reflecting and refocusing. not being super rigid in my thinking and just being as open-minded as possible. Like even with myself, like 2020 me never drank. I like cut everything out. And 2024 me is like, I love wine. I like, getting a drink with dinner. And like, I think just being open to consistently evolving and not putting myself in any sort of box just to like be prideful in one way or another and not like always around drinking, but just around like anything. Like, okay, I used to journal a lot, like pen to paper. I don't really do that as much anymore, but like I have a podcast now where like I kind of itch that scratch. So I think just continuing to be open to other perspectives, even if those perspectives are kind of like in the back of your own head, and just like giving yourself time to listen to yourself and clearly think. I think if you are, you know, always like I love listening to podcasts, but if you're always listening to a podcast, you always have a YouTube video going, like you don't give yourself that space to just like decompress with you. I think it's hard to be authentic to yourself because you're not listening to yourself. So just listening to myself more.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I actually need to take that advice. I did that. I noticed last night I like was just in my bed like and I had Hulu on in the background. I was like listening to like music at the same time. Like half the time I wasn't even paying attention to anything, but it was just so much chatter in my mind and like I would take breaks to like go on TikTok because I'm addicted right now. And I was just like this
Yeah.
is so bad. So
Hmm.
bad. Like I need to like, zoom out and like actually listen to like how I'm feeling and stuff like that. Um, so I kind of want to like transition into like phase two.
Yeah.
So but we hit your like right out of college, just like navigating, really leaning into you, leaning onto your support system. But then I feel like phase two is like after all of that, the fun happens, you graduate college, you get financial freedom, you're ready to be independent, you're making decisions, like then there's like reality hits and you're like, "Oh my god, this is the rest of my life." And I hate when people say that because I don't like think that as a negative thing at all, but there is a feeling. It's like a doom feeling.
Yeah.
When do you remember having that feeling?
Really recently, honestly. Um, I hate
Perfect.
to I hate to like admit this, but I think it's important to admit this because I think most people come to this like conclusion, at the same time in terms of like I'm scrolling on Instagram and there's people that are like literally before this podcast, I was on Instagram. Again, doom scrolling, it's a problem. I'm still trying to work that one out, but I saw like a pregnancy announcement and then it was like a wedding and like just all of these things where I'm like, oh my God, like, wait, I graduated with this person, or like, oh my God, that person's actually younger than me and they're like having babies and they have a house. And um, I think just like seeing that and then also like having space of like reflecting, like, okay, I do want to buy a house, I do want to get married, I do want to have children, and being like, holy crap, like I'm responsible for all of that. Like I have to make that happen. Like my mom, I don't get like, her like grocery money anymore. Like that's not a thing. I don't get like a direct deposit from mom and dad. And like I have to make this happen. And then also having like younger siblings, and my boyfriend's younger sister that like in some capacity, like looks up to you. And okay, how can I navigate this in a very like seamless way? It's never going to be seamless, but we always like in our heads, we're like, how do we do this perfectly?
Mhm.
But I was like, how do I make this happen? How do I do it the right way where like they get to learn from my right doing instead of my wrong doing? And of course, there's going to be like a mixture of both. It's not like, oh, you learn from this person's mistakes only or this person doing it perfect, 100% one way or the other. But I just want to be like that part in even just like my immediate family where like, okay, I can look up to McKailyn in this way. And so I think just like all of those emotions of what I want and being able to like help and influence in a positive way other people, I was like, holy crap, like this really is up to me to figure out all of this. Um, and it's a lot. And then also just like obviously I know we kind of talked about it off the podcast, but just like career changes and reflecting on like what makes me happy and how different that is from, even me from 18 when you choose your major to then like I don't know, kind of in like that, like right before reality hits of like, is this what I want to do? And then changing careers. I think it was just kind of like the perfect storm recently of me being like, holy crap, like I call the shots, I make the decisions, and this is all up to me.
Yeah, well, it's crazy too because we go from like the school system, even high school to college, of a syllabus. We're graded, we're told how well we do something. That is the grading system, ABC. Like, are you above average? Are you average? Are you below? Like, how are you performing at work? And like, there's check-ins and like all of these things that are, there's a system in place, but there's not a system like going through your day to day. It's like, so you don't know how you're performing. The only thing that we have is comparison, which is what people lean on. It's not the only thing we have. I want to take that back. But it's what a lot of people will look at to compare of like, am I on par with everyone else? Am I up to speed? Am I not? And that's where it then gets in your head. And adding on pressure, not even social pressure, but like for you were saying like siblings. Like I'm the oldest of four, and I've never thought about this until recently when I had a discussion with someone. The pressure that you have to create like a path that they can look up to and like be the person that they can come to for advice. And it's a pressure, and also like when you're struggling, you're like, oh my God, like do they see me struggling? Even though it's okay
Yep.
because they're going to struggle at some point too, or like maybe they are, you never know. But it's like the comparison and the pressure and like the unknown of like not knowing where you are on par in life.
Yeah.
And the unknown is so interesting. So like, do you have any way that you navigate like the unknowns?
Absolutely. First, I want to like also touch on like the pressure. Like I used to kind of just like navigate life and be like, oh my gosh, like I would feel just like such a heaviness on my shoulder of like pressure kind of being like this icky word to me of like, I feel like I have to do this a certain type of way. And I've started to like really lean into the idea that like pressure is a privilege. And like if you have pressure on you, like it is such a privilege because you do have younger siblings, you do have people at work or whatever it is for you that are counting on you. But that doesn't mean they're counting on you to do it perfectly or do it the first time. But pressure is 100% a privilege. And like that has helped my relationship or just like my mindset around pressure. And so like I hope that helps like somebody else. But in terms of like navigating the unknowns, I would say so kind of in my like rediscovery phase of myself, I got very into like affirmations and journaling and manifestation and all these things. And I think that's like so wonderful, but I almost felt like I had too much control. So when things weren't going perfect, I'm like, wait a minute, but like I wrote down like my affirmations and
I
like
told myself I was grateful today.
yeah, I was like, wait a minute, but like I'm doing all the things. Like, why is this not happening perfectly for me? And so I almost like leaned too much into like my ability to control things, where now I'm like trying to let go of the expectation that I can control everything. Not everything is in my control. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like I couldn't control what happened yesterday. And yes, controlling the controllables, what is in my control that I can do and do 100%. But like just because you work hard does not guarantee a certain outcome. Just because you do things perfectly, you journal, you do XYZ, doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be exactly what you had in your mind. So I like the unknown to be exactly that, the unknown, because I like to think that, you know, I might have a smaller mind when it comes to what I deserve or what is going to happen for me. And if it were up to me, a lot of things that happened in my life, even up until this point, would have been a lot smaller, would have been a lot less, for lack of a better term, perfect. Like I look at my life now and I'm like, if the version of me who could have scripted this out, they would have, you know, fallen really short for like my partner, for where I live now, for my job now. And so I think the unknown is almost this like version of everything that you don't know that you deserve yet, and being able to step into that and always expecting, or not expecting, but always being hopeful that it's going to be even better than you could script out. And even if there's obstacles that fall in your way, it's part of the path that's getting you to that next version of you. I'm religious, so I lean heavily into like walking into like my faith and being super rooted in that, where like, okay, I can write all my affirmations down, I can do all of the things, but like there's something bigger at play, whether that's God, whether that's the universe for somebody else. Like I just think that we're all so unique, and for us all to be so independently in how we think and how we operate and how we see the world. Like there's a reason why we're here at this time in this capacity. And so just like letting that all come to fruition and letting the unknown be more exciting than scary. And I'm still trying to learn that because I have not crafted that. I'm still a control freak, but slowly letting go of the rope and just knowing that there's things like better on the other side. And even if you were to ask somebody who like is big on like for simplicity's sake, we'll talk about social media. Like if you would have asked Alex Cooper, because I know you said call her daddy, and Sophia, and you would have asked Alex, like, what is your call her daddy journey look like? She would have never expected the huge fallout. She would have never expected then her, you know, kind of rebranding in some capacity on what she talks about, who she gets to talk to, hosting the Olympics. Like, there's so many things that the unknown and the scariness can bring so much greatness. And so just trying to be more open-minded to all of that.
Yeah, I love that. I think I needed to hear that. I had so I love like New Year's resolutions, New Year's goals, and I just did like my mid-year podcast episode about it. And this was the year of letting go. And I was a huge control freak. And to like some extent still am, but I'm learning that like things that are out of my control, let them be out of my control, and the things that are in my control, like one, have control over them, but like don't obsess, because sometimes it would put pressure or expect myself to be perfect. And if I came up like a little short, then I would get into like really bad negative self-talk, and like that it just was never healthy or happy. So I love what you said about like what you get and the situation you're in, it is a privilege, and like just have fun with it. Like if you can't control something, or it didn't go your way, or something else happened, like have fun with it. Twist the narrative, because it's so easy to lean into something, and then that's your identity, and that's what you use for validation, and then you go down like the rabbit hole. And I've definitely gone down there, and like thank God I am like in therapy, because it's helped so much, because I was just going down a path that was like not good. And
Yep.
it's so nice to like take a step back and being like, okay, you know what, like nothing will ever be perfect. Even the things in my control, like everyone's like, these are in your control. This is what you can do. I still like will fall short of those things. And it's just like learning that like sometimes my failures, I just have to make fun of and like have fun with it. And that's like
Yeah.
all I can do. So just trying to like make it more fun instead of like so serious, and like keep things more lighthearted.
100%. And you'll look back on like what you consider a failure now and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually so impressed because like what, like with the resources I had at that time, with my thought patterns that I had at that time, like I did the best I could. It's really easy, like in the moment, to be like, well, why didn't I do this or why didn't I do that? But like you are executing the best you can with what you have. And like the whole gap and gain, like, method of grading yourself is like instead of grading yourself compared to like who you want to be and like your ideal, you need to grade yourself backwards on like how far you've come. So like my first podcast episode, I was like, that is so embarrassing. I was saying like, by the way, I still do both of those things. Um, but I sounded like a robot. And my boyfriend was like, okay, but like you did not have a podcast before this. Like take the win of like now you have a podcast, like gap or gain. Are you comparing yourself to the Alex Coopers of the world, or are you going to compare yourself to McKailyn, who didn't have a podcast 5 minutes ago? And I'm like, okay, I can do that one.
Yeah, it's literally just like one step at a time. Like I am someone who needs something people to like put that into perspective sometimes.
A
Same
hundred
reason how
percent.
I needed someone to like push me into starting a podcast, and now I love it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny
but
because my podcast journey, like starting, was so similar to yours, where my boyfriend was like, okay, you're doing a lot of talking. Like, can we like roll that into a little bit of action? And I'm like, okay, I'm trying. It's
yeah, like
nerve-wracking.
you can't talk the talk without walking the walk. So
Hmm.
I had to start walking the walk, which is funny. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So we have like 4 phases. We just did the first two, and now McKailyn's gonna kind of go into like the second two.
Yes. So our second phase is finding balance, which I feel like balance is such like a like it's an interesting word because some people are like, there's no such thing as balance. And then there's some people that's like the only way I can function is like through balance. And I think that there's like different phases that can kind of serve, like the word balance can kind of mold to what that means for you in that point of your life. So like I'm curious for you, Emma, like how do you currently define like balance in your life?
Yeah, so I actually have totally like reframed my mindset around balance this year more than ever because I am such a type A. I'm the eldest sibling. I always just wanted to like be the best. I was always like a leader and everything. And so I feel like that mindset always made me just think like everything had to be perfect. And I remember like post grad, like I am someone who's always like kind of struggled a little bit. Like this is so vulnerable with like very bad negative self-talk and like body image in my relationship with like my plate. And I remember when I graduated college, it was like, I'm going to become perfectly balanced. Like everything's going to just change because I'm going to have a great job and I'm going to have great friends and I'm going to work out and I'm going to be in a new city. And then when you like expect everything to be perfect and you have a slip up, like then you just like get in your head. And for the longest time, I was like, okay, well, that's fine. Like, I'll just start over on Monday. I'll just start over tomorrow. Like it'll be perfect tomorrow. Like I'll get all my ducks in a row soon. And so in in doing that, I feel like I found out what was serving me and what doesn't. So I like have like a list of like non-negotiables that I do. And it's not necessarily that like I have such strict rules around them, but like I know what makes me feel good. So one thing that like I do every day is I love to go for a 45-minute walk. It can
I
be
love
right
that.
when I wake up, it can be after work, but like I have to do it and I like to work out like at least 3 times a week. And I really like need that. Like it helps my mental health completely. Like those are some non-negotiables. I also need like some alone time like throughout every single day, and I just kind of have to figure out like how I find that, especially like with traveling for work or like being in long distance relationships. Like how can I still prioritize me? And that was such a work in progress for like the last like 2 years. And then when I moved to LA, I remember I was like, this is the lifestyle, the healthy lifestyle. Everything's going to be perfect. I have like so many amazing relationships in my life. I have a podcast, I have hobbies, like everything needs to be perfect. And for a while, I was like peak, like my mental health was phenomenal. I felt so good about everything. And then like slippery slope into just like the second I didn't do like one thing that was making me feel good, I was like, oh my God, I feel horrible about myself, the negative self talk. And so, similar to you, this was like my year of like letting go of like, it's a balancing act and I'll never have it in balance. Like, I never will be in balance. Like, there will always be
Yep.
something out of balance. So, I don't even like to say, like, how do I maintain it as much as like, what do I do to like keep myself sane? And like, it's never
100%.
balanced and it's different almost every day. But like, I know I have like a few things that I really need to, I can resort back on. And that's like, it's a little bit of movement, honestly.
I love that. There's like a MVP process that like my boyfriend works in like more like mental health, like like structuring like your days and like grading yourself fairly. And he always talks about like your MVP process. Like what are like your things that you have to do that you know are gonna make yourself feel good and like grade yourself on that. And like that could be 3 things. That could literally be like make your bed. Like they don't have to be like you're moving mountains. So I love that you're like, okay, here are the things that I have to do that like I'm not going to stray from. And if I'm doing those things, like that can be my version of balance. And then there's going to be give and take throughout, the day or the week with other things. I definitely love that because I feel like so many times it's like all in or like not all in at all. But there can definitely be like, okay, I can be all in on XYZ and then the rest, it's kind of like a yin and a yang. Like you get to kind of like blend like 2 different worlds, so to speak, together.
Yeah, exactly. And like some days, like if you can't do and I said like movement makes me feel very good, but like at the end of the day, like if I want to like define a day as successful, like, and I've been talking about this a little bit lately to like the people in my life of like what my core values are. And like
Hmm.
it'll be at the end of the day, like, was I kind? Like, was I thoughtful? Like, no matter what I did that day, was I driven in it? Like, did I feel passionate? Like, am I seeking connection? And like, those are things that are me to my core. So at the end of the day, I'm like, if I could do those and I didn't stray away, like, even if I didn't go on like the stupid 45-minute walk, but I was still kind that day, like, still a
Yeah.
successful day.
I love that. I almost asked you a question on core values and I was like, oh my God, that sounds like so corporate. Like these are our core values. But I think it's important to like know how you're grading yourself. And it always comes back to like your values, core values, and just like being able to really have like your like minimum standard, so to speak. Like my minimum standard in each day, like, yeah, maybe it's not my walk and how long I was outside, but maybe it's like how I treated other people, how I treated myself. And so I love that. That's so important. I definitely know that like for everybody, there have been times that like we fall off balance. So like when has been a moment where you felt like very out of balance and how did you recognize it was happening? Slash like kind of how did you have that self-reflection time to even recognize like, okay, something is off balance, something is out of whack, and I need to kind of like start to shift this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've had this feeling like so many times. So, I'll just talk about the most recent. I had a huge job change and I left corporate and now I'm working for a startup and I completely had to like change my routine and my schedule. I was remote, I was going in person. I had to, be self motivating and it's so different being corporate to startup and like I realized that during this change, I would like rely on different like coping mechanisms that always weren't like super healthy for me. And I was just like, okay, wait, I'm like doing so much work. Like, why am I like resorting to the fastest thing that's going to give me like the satisfaction? And it made my life out of balance. And it's one of those things that I like kind of have to just be like aware. I'm like, sometimes I'll do something and I was like, whoa, okay, like I don't feel good about that. Like, I don't really feel good right now. Like, why did I do that? What emotion? It's just like stopping and thinking and then just being like, okay, like I just am like feeling this emotion. And like, that's why I will always harp on like, if you're feeling any emotion, like feel it. Like, and you're not always going to be able to like totally feel it, but just sit there and just be like, take a deep breath and be like, okay, I'm anxious. Like I'm just
Yeah.
anxious. Like, like everyone gets anxiety in different shapes or form, or like, okay, like I'm
Mhm.
just mad. I'm just pissed off about this. Like, let me breathe. Like it's always funny. My family will like always be like, because I have a nickname like Emma Dilemma because I'm just like a moody person. And especially like to people I'm really close with, like my mood will shift and I wear my emotions on my face. So sometimes my family will be like, okay, like do you need like a snack or
Right.
something? Like
Like, what's going
what's
on?
going on? And I'm like, oh shit, like I just need to like take a breather, like and just breathe and like kind of zoom out and then like it'll all be fine. Um, but yeah, it's like a learning process. Everything's just a learning process.
100%. Emma Dilemma. That is so funny. It's like funny how like some nicknames that we get like through childhood, you're like, that's not me. And then as you get older, you're like, that is totally me, but like it doesn't need to be you forever. But no, I definitely I resonate with that in some of my nicknames that like I won't share here because they're more embarrassing than that. Um, But do you ever feel like it can be beneficial to kind of be off balance? Like, are you ever in a moment where you're like, okay, I recognize I'm off balance, but like this is temporary and I have to get through this? Or are you somebody that like really thrives and strives for just like balance as often as you can get it?
Oh my God, if I could tell everyone to like break up with a routine or like challenge themselves to like, get off balance or off kilter, I think it's so beneficial. Like even for when I was like at my peak, like physical health, mental health, like performance wise, like productivity, and then like got like into like too much into it. Like when I started changing my habits to just like have a better relationship of like being a human and being realistic about like what you should do in your day, I was like, why did I put so much value on these things that don't even matter like at all? And so I would
Mhm.
like highly recommend like everyone like if you're off balance, like just like you said, kind of look at it as like it's a privilege of like I'm off balance or something feels off, and like I'm not even gonna say balance, but like you just feel off because like you know what it is to feel good, you know? So it's like
Mhm.
understand that like what's probably happening to you is not a bad thing. It's just life and it's just a situation. And like the sun is still gonna come up tomorrow. And you
Yep.
know, every day of the week is still gonna end in Y, no matter what it is. And just look at it as like, okay, like it's okay that I feel like this because now I know what it's gonna feel like to feel really good. So I think like, you know, it ebbs and it flows and nothing's perfect. And like some days you'll be on a high and some days you'll be on a low, and they serve their own purpose and are so important in their own ways. And I feel like if you just like stay like on balance or like want this perfectionist version of yourself, you're gonna put validation and importance on things that don't always matter. And then you can hyperfixate on that, and that's just like it's a rabbit hole.
100%. Like, I think it's so important to be a flexible thinker. And like, sometimes when you are somebody who is in like this phase of like needing to be in control, wanting to be in control, and sometimes it serves you. Like, sometimes you can control like what you do from sun up to sundown for a majority of your day. But the second something happens that's like not in your plans, it can really derail you. And so, like, having to exercise that part of your brain that's being a flexible thinker, whether or not it's like still in your control, breaking, certain habits throughout the week or the month. Like, I think that's so important. And you kind of touched on like going to therapy and that being like such like a catapult to like this version of you that you get to like experience now. Like, similarly, I started therapy, and one of the first things she said was like, homegirl, we got to get you out of your routine. Like, I love that you love knowing what you're doing every single day, but like it can be something as small as like I would go out for date night. It was always dinner, right? Okay, can date night look like something more creative, something that like doesn't, or like doing something that doesn't have like a desired outcome, like go to a painting class. Okay, I am a perfectionist, so I want this painting to turn out great, but like, am I going to hang this painting on my wall? Like, no, thank you. I'm good. I don't need like a picture of a cactus with a moonlight in the background. So like, does it really matter if it's like done right? But I think like just again, like exercising that part of your brain, which is like, this is fun. It does not matter. There's no desired outcome other than to just like be in this present moment and like let go. And I love how you're like, go break up with your routine, like do something different, get yourself out there. I think that's so important. And I think in this like society kind of right now, there's like mixed messaging on like, is a routine good? Does everybody need to wake up at 5 a.m. to be successful? What does it take to be successful? And so it's hard to like, it's hard to know what you want to listen to and what you don't. And so I think like, yeah, exactly what you said. First step, like break up with what you're doing, even if it's for one single day on the weekend where it doesn't matter, and like see how it plays out, see how it feels. Do you feel more energized? I literally love that. I know you kind of touched on it with like potentially breaking up with your like routine, but what other advice would you have for somebody who is listening who is like, I'm feeling off balance. I don't know how to get in balance. Like, I just like don't know what's going on, and they're struggling to find any sort of balance in their life.
I would say, first off, I would say like I'm so like my heart goes out to you. Like I just, you know, I know exactly what you're feeling, and sometimes you just like don't know what to do or where to go. And like my first thing is to like lean on someone and just not even like you don't have to open up or like say like what you're feeling, or just like find connection with anyone or anything. And it sometimes it's trial and error, like reach out to a friend and like just talk about like what they did that weekend. Like only ask questions about them and like zoom out of your own life for a little bit and realize how good that makes you feel of just like talking to someone else like only about them and like really connecting. And like the other thing I would say is like, what are very small things that like bring you joy? Like, do you love like having, you know, like a glass of lemonade? And I'm like thinking of lemonade of like something you like from childhood, or like what's your favorite song, or what is like something that is just like really comforting to you, and just like do it for a little bit and just be like, okay, like this is a good emotion. Like this is like one step in the right direction. Like now, like how can I branch out a little bit more to like make me feel a little bit better? Um, and also just know that like your balance is going to look different at so many different points of your life, like, or what you want to do. So have grace with yourself and just know that like it too, like it will pass. Um, and maybe it's like going to the drawing board and like if you're like, wait, this really used to make me feel so good and like now it doesn't. Like I actually went through a phase like that with, like I said, I love moving my body, but I kind of went through a phase of like Pilates and I was like, this isn't making me feel as good anymore. Like looking at
Mm.
it now as like a chore and like sometimes that might look a little bit different for everyone, whether it's like reading, cooking, like I don't know, anything. Um, just know that like who you are today is not the same person that you were a month ago. It's not the same person you were like 2 years ago. And I really hope it's not. Otherwise, like you really do need to be off balance and like relearn about yourself. Like this is a privilege. Um, and so just like understand that it might take some time to relearn about the person that you are because you're always changing. But it's paying attention to the little things because they do add up and they're like really the big things.
Oh, I feel like I needed to hear that. I know you said that earlier, but I'm like, dang, I needed to hear that. I have never like in such a simple yet like impactful way heard the advice of like go detach from your life by like letting somebody just like vent or talk about their life and like you're pouring into somebody and you're like building a relationship, but like you're able to also just like step aside from like your thoughts and your inner dialogue for a moment. I absolutely love that. And I feel like that's not advice I ever like sit in enough. And so that's awesome. I also feel like we're like kind of doing that in a weird way. So I'm like, maybe I'm just enjoying it because I feel like I'm doing it right now where I'm like listening to you more.
Oh
I
yeah. No,
just
I'm
I
gonna be
love
in like
that.
such a good mood after this for sure.
I know me and her before we started, for anyone listening, we were like, we're gonna get through this probably like kind of quick because we have like a Zoom limit. And I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is probably the longest podcast episode we're ever gonna have, but like it's well worth it and I love it. One other question about balance. In terms of just like your relationship. So like they're like as you're getting older, you're kind of managing a lot of these relationships and you kind of again get to structure your day how you want it to be. So like how do you manage your relationship with yourself, with friends, with like partners or future partners? Like how do you kind of find that balance? Like if somebody's like wanting to connect with you and you're like, wait a minute, I need this time for myself. Like, how do you kind of create even like maybe boundaries is a better word, to protect your balance and really what you're trying to achieve?
I love this question. So I'm just gonna start off by like I feel like the luckiest girl in the world with the people in my life. So and I definitely have like solidified and worked on relationships, which is like why I like feel so good and so lucky about them. And like they're all very fulfilling relationships. And I'm so happy to say that. But at the end of the day, I do know that like I have to have boundaries like with myself. I consider myself more of like an extrovert of like I get energy like when I'm like going out and like around people. However, I charge like by myself and I need to be alone. And sometimes, especially recently, like I kind of was like the other day, like, am I an extrovert? Because I've been more like doing a lot of things on my own and not really like seeking it. It's just kind of like naturally what's happening. Like everyone's just so busy. And like everyone's traveling. Like no one is in LA, I feel like right now. Um, but I would say like the way that I balance is I always want to say like yes first, but if I have like an immediate like idea or answer of like no, I'm sorry, like that is like something like for example, like Sunday mornings, like I go to therapy at 11 a.m. every Sunday. Like I always like I won't try and make plans Sunday morning because like I need that time to myself. Or like if someone asks me to like do this and I know that like right at the moment I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm gonna have like the emotional, like the energy, the stamina to like go and do that. Like if it's a no right now, it's gonna be a no in 5 days probably.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like listening to like what you like for like plans wise. And the other thing that is that like I have a good relate like balance with all of my relationships, like I said, because they are so fulfilling. And like I paid attention to how these people made me feel in my life. And if it
Mhm.
was like, I don't know if you listen to like it's me Tanks her podcast, but she's like some of it's like a battery is not included friend, where it's like, are they draining you? Like Or are they uplifting you? Are they always negative or are they listeners? And it's like, I know the type of people I like to be around. And I'm very fortunate, like, that I have like such a good group of people around me.
Oh, I love that. I feel like that's something like I struggle with. I'm like opposite. I'm like, okay, I don't feel like I want to do these plans right now, but I will in 5 days. And you never do. You're always like, what was I thinking? Like I knew from the start, like I just like didn't have the mental capacity and it could have nothing to do with the person on the other side. It's just like where you're at like that week or going into the new week where you're like, I just need like me time. But it's
Yes.
hard to say no to people sometimes. But like when you say yes to people, you're saying no to yourself. And so often it's like you have to be like in some way brave and bold to be able to say yes to yourself more. And sometimes that looks like no to others, but that's like hard. But I think it all starts exactly what you're saying is like evaluating relationships like from the start. And like I definitely like kudos to you for being able to like slow down from the start and being like, is this relation like reflecting, like giving yourself the space and time to reflect on even relationships because sometimes it can spiral and like snowball and you're like I'm really good friends with this person but like am I like do we value the same things and then it's like that awkward like friendship breakup where you're like I didn't ever want it to be like this but it's hard to do that if you're not asking yourself the right questions which I feel like kind of brings us into the next phase, which is exploring yourself, which I feel like comes with a lot of asking yourself the right questions, getting to know yourself, and like where that takes you in all capacities of life, whether that's like relationships, work. But what is like the most impactful way that you've found that you got to know yourself better through doing, this thing?
That's such a good question because I don't know if it's just like one thing.
Hmm.
I am someone who I'm just a very independent person generally. Um, but I will say like there are things that have like made me learn a lot about myself and it's when I'm doing them alone. And alone as in like, maybe I'm going to a workout class by myself, which I personally love doing, or maybe I am going on a walk and I'm like, well, let me buy myself a coffee, like let me walk into these stores, or um a lot of times like in it was like when it's really rainy in LA, there were a lot of afternoons where I was just like not doing anything and I was like bored. Or when I first moved to LA, I would get done with work at like 2:30 because I was working East Coast hours. And so it's like those times where it's like I have just free time. Like, what do I do? Um, and it was just like, you could look at it as like a good thing or a bad thing. And some days it was good and some days it was like really not. But the exploring yourself is just, again, it's just like being mindful and like being present with yourself because like it's not every day you're like, okay, this today I'm gonna try and like color, or tomorrow I'm gonna try and write, and then I'm gonna try this workout class, and like I'm gonna explore and learn about myself because I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Like you can do all the things, you can do all of it. You can meditate, you can go to therapy, you can like eat well, you can work out, but like if you're not being present and being honest with yourself about how you're feeling, you'll never learn. And the other thing I would say is like seek discomfort. And in some ways for me, I learned a lot about myself when I was meeting new people. So I started doing friend dates in LA. I started, making friends, and then it was like seek the discomfort of hanging out with them more, like having vulnerable conversations or getting people to open up. But it was in those moments of discomfort that I learned the most about myself and like grew the most as well.
Absolutely. And I loved like how you started that, which was like going to communal spaces alone. Like I feel like that's so important and I feel like that intimidates people whether you're going to like a group fitness class and you're by yourself and you think, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to step into this space where everybody knows everybody." It's like, no, there's like something so empowering where you're like, "I'm going to show up." And it's not like a gym where like, okay, this person showed up an hour ago, this person's doing this person's doing that. It's like, no, we're showing up. We all know that we're taking this instructor's class. We're doing this type of class. This starts at this
Mhm.
time and ends at this time. And just being around community by yourself can also like fill your cup up in ways that like I can't even begin to articulate because I feel like if you're lonely, like go do something that is a community event that you don't even have to talk to them. Like nobody's expecting you to talk to them. Nobody's expecting you not to talk to them. So like however you're feeling that day, you kind of get to show up. And so I absolutely like resonate with that on a super deep level of like just show up to spaces, get to know people, get to know the space. Again, reflecting, does this space make me feel good? What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And kind of just like going from there. And then, of course, discomfort. I feel like that is just like something that if you're not feeling uncomfortable in some capacity in some area of your life, whether it's like work, friends, side things that you're pouring into, if you're not feeling like this for us, I'm sure, at least for me, was like uncomfortable to some extent, right? But like if you're not doing these things, like you're not growing, you're not building relationships, and you're staying stagnant. And then that eventually becomes uncomfortable. So you're not going to ever avoid the discomforts,
Yeah.
which
I
is a
always say
good
like
or
growth.
bad thing.
Yeah, growth is not made in the comfort zone. I always say that.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. What interests have you outgrown over the last couple years? Like, I feel like your change over the last few years in like your post grad, getting to know yourself, finding that like all of this has been so different because you've seen like you literally went from a small town to
Yeah.
LA. Like that is so unbelievably different, which is amazing. But what interests have you outgrown that surprised you or things that you're like into now that you're like, I never would have thought this was going to be like a big part of my life?
Yeah, like so many. Oh my God. So what I love being busy. And I go through phases a lot. So like I remember right out of post grad, I was in a huge cooking phase and I was like pickling everything. I was also home. So I graduated college and then I moved to Chicago in October when I started my job. So I had like May to October and moved home for the summer. But I was like always cooking and pickling and like I loved it. And then I outgrew it because I didn't have time when I started work. And it was just more like meal prepping, like going to dinners, going out. And then in Chicago, what I was really into like the restaurant scene. And I value the restaurant scene still to this day, but I'll go through phases of like eating out or like trying to save money and like staying in. And I think Chicago, I don't know if it's like the best in the US, but has like an amazing restaurant scene. So I would like dive in before I would go to a restaurant. Like I was on their homepage, like reading about the chef, like reading about their story, like
Uh,
looking at their menu design. Like it wasn't like, oh, I love going to get dinner with my friends. I like it was an act of like service. Like I was like, this is amazing. Like this needs to be put on a pedestal. And I recently, it's been in like moving to LA too. Like their food scene isn't as good. And I'll do it when I still go to restaurants, but I'm not like seeking it out as much. Um, but what I've then gotten into in LA is podcasting. But for a
mhm.
month, I took a break, and I feel like in LA, I've had very huge interest of podcasting. I've had huge interest in like finding my own style, fashion wise. Which my fashion right now sucks. I'm like a sweats girl right now, and I'm like, but I have all of these amazing clothes in my closet, and I literally only want to wear
Yeah.
sweatpants. Phases. I don't know. And so yeah, it's been podcasting. It's been like health and wellness. And I was like really into it. And it was like my personality. And I still love it, but it's not like my personality right now. And I feel like
Mhm.
right now I'm in a really good place of like, I know things like I'm not in a huge phase or like in a huge obsession with anything, but like I have these little things that I love. Like I like I just started reading again. Like I'm doing the podcast. Like I'm seeing my friends. I'm like going for walks. I'm like doing Pilates, but I'm doing it all like a lesser scale of like an obsession. And it's just like more of like a mix, which is nice because I
Nice.
know I'm gonna get obsessed with something soon. Like I'm feeling a little bit stir crazy. So I know like there's a new one that's gonna come up. I just don't know what it is yet. And like once I try it, and it'll stick or it won't. Um, so it's been like so many different things. And so I like will outgrow them and then like I'll get back into them. Like I outgrew pickling and like literally like was I have like kimchi pickles in my fridge. Like I'm doing it again. You know, it's like, but I haven't done it in like years. Like it's just like
Mhm.
it's in and out. Or like honestly, like I even go through phases with like going out to bars. Like I
Mhm.
will go through phases of like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna go and like drink. I don't want to be hungover like for like a month or a few weeks. But then like some like I feel like this summer and especially like more around like May to June, I was like, let's do it all. let's
Yeah.
go out as much as we can. And like it's just like you go through phases and you like I just let them come on as they come on and I dismiss them as like they go out. It's just like a season thing.
Yeah, I'm like so interested because I feel like you have like these things that you kind of like you said like cycle through. And I know you've kind of like touched on this like briefly with like how you kind of got into them, but like you're going stir crazy right now. There might be things that you're cycling back in. There might be something new that comes that you discover. How do you start to like discover new interests? Like somebody who's feeling similar to you right now, who's like, I'm a little bit stir crazy, and like you have like a little bit more trust in the process because you're like been here, done that. Like I know that it's gonna get filled with something. But
Yeah.
what would you say somebody who's like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what to do with my time. Like, how do you find like the next thing?
So I feel like I've said this so many times, and it's just like a good rule of thumb of just like being aware of your surroundings and like how you feel in the moment. Like, and a lot of times it's like look up from your phone and like if you see someone like doing, this activity at the beach, or if they're playing tennis and you're like, oh, I haven't tried tennis. Like I have a tennis racket and I've played tennis like twice because I thought that was going to be like something I was into because I saw people playing tennis. Like it's literally like something like I'll see or like I'm a doom scroller right now. I'm literally addicted to TikTok. I wake up at 3
Same
a.m.
girl.
some nights and I go on TikTok. It's so bad. But I've learned a lot like of some things of like interests and hobbies, and there's a lot of people out there who will vlog of like trying to find my hobby, and maybe they're like paddleboarding or they're running or they're walking or they're volunteering. Like there's so many things that you can be doing, but if you're not like present and like actually aware of like what you're looking around like when you're out and about in public, you're not going to really realize it. And also like if you have people like you look up to, like what do they do? Like are you interested in like being more like them? Like I in college I always had like a mentor or something, but it's like my light just turned off, so now I'm just gonna be recording in a way darker thing because it just died.
That's okay. My light died a little bit ago too. I was like, it's all right. We're here.
I literally look so dark right now. Um, I promise I'm not like now I'm like talking about serious stuff like in the dark. It's so much more serious. But
I
yeah,
feel like
it's
it's a
just
good
like
setting.
yeah, I know it really is. But yeah, just be like being more aware and just like being open to things. Like, I don't know, maybe if you hear like someone like speaking Italian at the grocery store, like what if you think like, oh, maybe I want to learn like Italian, like it's just like being aware.
I love that. Like picking up your head. Like, and if your head's in your
Just like
phone,
look
like,
up. Yeah.
yeah. And like if your head's in your phone, like consuming the right content, like just like being aware all in all. I love that. There was this TikToker, like I'm so gonna butcher this because I can't remember her last name. I think her name is Sophia. I'll link like her TikTok in the description, but she used to date this girl, Avery Cyrus. They had like a little breakup. But anyway, she is going through this phase of like having to find herself again and whatever. And she just turned 25 and she's doing like 25. What is like her little cute like quote thing? It's like 25 things since turning 25. And she's trying to do like a new thing I think it's like every week because every day would seem like insane. But sometimes it's as simple as like going to therapy. Sometimes it's like, hey, I'm going to try this new drink. Like sometimes it's, bigger things like a brand new hobby. But like, again, how you're saying, like just being aware and like picking up your head, like it just takes a little bit more of like, okay, I'm going to be more intentional with trying to find hobbies. And she has
Yeah.
probably tried like out of 25 things, she's not going to like all 25 things, right?
Oh, she might
But
like two. She might like zero.
exactly, but at least like she's trying and she's putting herself out there. And again, like going back to your like quote that you lean into, like you don't grow without being uncomfortable and like you have to find that discomfort. So similar to like our doom scrolling, I feel like we have that in common, which is great, which is also how we found each other. So like again, not mad about it, but
Mhm.
um off camera, once again, we kind of talked about like this sense of like you being an individual, like not just you, just anybody, has kind of become like a little bit more, I don't want to use the word cookie cutter, but social media definitely has like its trends, similar things kind of take off day in the life and like what that looks like. And like, I think it's harder to try new things because you're kind of consuming very similar content over and over and over again. So by default, you're like, I'm going to try this. And if it doesn't resonate with you, or like if it's not sticking with you, sometimes it's hard to kind of like branch out. And so, like, I don't know how I want to totally phrase this, but sometimes hobbies that like used to not be weird, like, I feel like people used to be a little bit more different from each other, for the better or the worse. I feel like it's brought a lot of people together, but there used to be like hobbies out there that were like, for lack of a better term, would kind of be like more weird now. Like knitting is such like that's like so normal, but I feel like when people see it, it's like, oh my gosh, like she knits. Like why is she not doing Pilates and like doing her juice cleanse or something?
Yeah,
You
like
know,
it's niche. It's so different. Yeah.
exactly. And like depending upon what side of like TikTok you're on, maybe you're like, all of my TikTok is knitting and like the Pilates is the weird one. But like there's, topics that are just like consistently kind of cycled through. And how do you like allow space for others in your content in your podcast to kind of discover new hobbies, new parts of themselves? Do you share that? And then again, like what's a hobby that you have discovered that maybe isn't as cookie cutter that's been on like TikTok or YouTube or podcasting? Like, what hobby has that been for you that's been like, again, lack of a better term, but more of like the weird one that's kind of come out of like left field for you?
Oh my God, I have the weirdest one I'm doing right now. And I was texting my boyfriend and I was like, doing my adult coloring book. And
I
I was
love.
like, I feel so lame. And he was like, yeah, no offense. That's like really lame. And I was like, yeah, I know, I know. As I'm like sending him photos and he's like ranking them. Because I'm like, it's like
Oh my
sushi, like
God.
this artist like loves little bunnies. So she'll like make a sushi thing and like put a bunny on it. And I'm like coloring it. And I love it, but it's just like mindful. It also makes me tired. So I do it before like I'm going to bed.
Mhm.
Um, but like I see a lot of people trying like watercoloring, and like different things like that. Like one of my friends was just talking about watering coloring. I got the coloring book from like my therapist, or like it used to be a big thing of like coloring like swear words. Like it'd be like fuck all capitalized, and like you would color it. And, like that was an adult coloring book and like COVID, or like paint by numbers. So it's just
Mhm.
funny how like things like resurface. So that's like definitely my weird one, but I talk about it on my podcast all the time because I pretty much say everything on my podcast.
I was gonna say, I heard that the adult coloring book while you're watching Sex and City, right? Is that
So
like
into
your
Sex in the City right now.
Oh yeah,
I
Sex and
so
City.
am. Oh my
Oh my
God.
God. I started watching episode one like a few weeks ago, and then you mentioned it on your podcast, and I was listening to it, and I was like, I have to like get back into it. But I too was like in the background while I was doing laundry and a million other things, and I was like, okay, I need to like sit down and just like do one thing. But I feel like that's like a good balance, like adult coloring book, watching a show, listening to a podcast. Like I feel like those two work together, so you're not
Yeah,
just
it's
like
just
totally
like makes
filling your
me like,
brain.
yeah, like zen out. Like just before I fall asleep, I'm like, oh, I'll just like forget up the world and like color these rabbits.
I love that. Any last words of like encouragement for anybody, like any of the phases you can touch on? Because I know that you kind of just got to touch on two, but any like last words before we wrap up in terms of just like advice, final thoughts, all the phases, anything that you want to share?
Oh my God, I have no idea. I always ask my guests this too. I'm like, what are the last things you want? What are your last words that you want to say before we end this podcast? Um, I would say this has just like been on my mind, but like, and maybe I mentioned it in this podcast. I honestly don't even remember. I feel like I've been rambling, but like, let the fun things be fun. And like, it shouldn't be like we talk about like the serious things. And I feel like we talk about them because they need to be talked about. But at the same time, like, let the fun things be fun. Like, let the confusing parts somehow have a way to be fun.
Mm,
Um, and just like, don't dismiss anything. Don't feel like you're alone because you're not. Um, and I mean, there's so much advice in here that I could just reiterate, but like we're so young. So like take what you need and leave what you don't.
yes.
So yeah.
100%. I feel like that's like the biggest skill. If I could like acquire one skill and never lose it, it would be like knowing what advice I need to take and what advice I just need to leave because everybody's so different. And like advice, like good advice is good advice, but it might not be good for everybody. And so just being able to like filter through that, including this podcast, like you mentioned, it's like so important. But um I 100% agree with like let the fun things be fun. There are so many times, Emma, I know that you can like resonate with this where you look back and you're like, I took that so seriously. And like
Yeah.
that had no business being that serious. And that could have been so much more fun, so much more enjoyable. And like somehow like I kind of ruined that for myself. Like why did I do that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a good
I love
thing.
that.
Yeah.
Um, if you want to kind of wrap us up and then I'll have some closing thoughts, but Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was such a fun episode. So I'm so happy that you guys all got to listen to both of us talk and like talk a little bit about our experiences that are very similar and like we still share different insights. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. And McKaylin, if you had any last thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say same thing. I feel like I rambled on this podcast so much, but it's so fun to be able to like talk to somebody. Like when you do so many solo episodes with like heavier topics, it can kind of be hard because you're like just talking in a circle in your own brain. So I just appreciate you like being like my soundboard a little bit. And for you guys all listening, if you're still listening, like no joke, it's almost been like probably over an hour and some change. And we literally were like, this will be done in like 30 minutes. Like, no worries there. So if you guys are still listening, thank you. I feel like social media can be such a powerful tool, and I just want to reiterate it one last time on here because had it not been for social media, and again, how Emma said, like pick up your head or like make sure you're consuming like, content that's going to serve you. Like I would have never had this connection with Emma. I would have never, had access to this conversation. And so, just like your gentle reminder, social media doesn't need to be this like scary thing that you limit yourself on. Like, let it be a tool instead of a trap, is kind of like what I always am trying to lean into. The tool is like finding your community, finding your people. There's like such an abundance, like, there's what, 7 something billion people in this world, and we somehow have access to like a mass majority of them, like through these social media apps. So, like, use them and use them like not wisely, but use them for your benefit because it's really not designed to like keep tabs on, the people that you don't have anything in common with anymore. It's not there to like serve as this place of comparison, whether it's like supposed to make you feel better or worse. It's really there to like connect people. So to Emma's community, to my community, like we're all coming together, and I'm just like so thankful for TikTok and Instagram for like making this all happen. And Em, I'm just so thankful for you and you sharing your insights and just like having this conversation with me. I so appreciate you, and I can't even like express my gratitude in words on here. This was just like so much fun.
Oh, yeah, I agree. That was so sweet. Thank you. And also everyone follow, like, subscribe to both of our podcasts, My Public Journal and Who Actually Knows. And we will talk to you all on our podcast on our next episodes. Bye guys.
Bye, guys.